This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. It's Friday already. I don't know how this week has unfolded for you, but goodness me, I now understand, if I didn't already, and between you and me, I did, why the Chinese say, may you live in interesting times, as a curse. When I was a younger man, wet behind the ears, callow, idealistic, untainted by the cynicism of maturity, I used to think it was like a good luck thing. I used to think it was, may you live in interesting times. Oh, thanks, mate. Yeah, I'd love to live in interesting times. Nah. Nope. Give me dull times. Give me sunshine. Give me uninteresting times any day of the week. And what did I say to you yesterday? As if to prove the point that we would barely have finished ranting and raving about the absurdity of a board of peace populated by war criminals and genocide apologists, and then the next thing would come along that we were going to get angry about, animated by, and we'd start talking about that as well. But you have to. I realise this. You absolutely have to. You can't stop. If you stop, it becomes even more normalised than it is already. In this country now, do you know, I've resisted the urge to turn to our favourite unhinged columnist this morning, because I can't wait to see. I thought I'd do it live with you. We'll open up the Daily Mail and see what Dick Littlejohn has to say about Donald Trump essentially dancing on the graves of our war dead. Because as his biggest cheerleader in the UK media, presumably this is the moment that he acknowledges the gravity of his error. Because right-wing columnists like nothing more, and indeed right-wing broadcasters like nothing more than to trumpet their admiration for and support of our military. You know, it is the absolute gospel truth that they bow to nobody in their patriotic fervour for supporting our boys, particularly when there are some immigrants to moan about and you can pretend that you care about homeless veterans. So you know and I know that these people are so honest and clear in their commitment to the military that I cannot wait to see what they have had to say about what Donald Trump did yesterday. But I should probably apologise first, because you may not know. And if you don't know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry because it's gross. If you lost somebody in Afghanistan particularly, but any really member of the military in your family or a friend, then you will find it even more hideous than the rest of us do. But the reason why I apologise is because we're already breaking our rule. Or are we? I don't know, because you can't not talk about it. But we are part of the problem that we described yesterday. We're moving on to the next thing. Perfectly possible that they will too. This ludicrous board of peace. You know what he's already done? He's already told Mark Carney, you can't be in it anyway. So Mark Carney doesn't want to be in it. So Donald Trump has sent him a public message saying you can't be in it. I don't know how old you are, but when you were 13, you probably had a mate who got dumped and insisted that he'd actually done the dumping. Do you remember? She didn't dump me, I dumped her. That's the sort of behaviour you might expect from a 13-year-old boy. The President of the United States is now doing exactly the same thing in the context of geopolitics, saying to somebody who has dumped him, you didn't dump me, I dumped you. So, I mean, it's beyond pathetic, but here we are. Here we are. Have a listen. I mean, it needs a little bit of context, perhaps. For example, Article 5 of NATO has only been triggered once. It was triggered by the United States of America after the Twin Towers attack, and it meant that their NATO allies joined them in Afghanistan, something we may talk about a little later. I don't fully understand the relationship that the average member of our military has with our country's NATO commitments. It's something I found myself thinking about this morning and being a little bit fascinated by in advance of the things that you are going to tell me. It's true, I think, that we are the second biggest, what would you say, sacrifice? We made that, British military made the second biggest sacrifice during that 20-year deployment in Afghanistan. UK troops, second only to the United States in making the ultimate sacrifice. Denmark, and I didn't know this, Denmark lost 44 soldiers to our 457 military personnel. That would not just be combat troops. There will be people caught in crossfire and people killed who were working in offices and things like that. But we lost 457 personnel in Afghanistan over a 20-year period. 2,000 military and civilian personnel were wounded. In addition to that, France, Germany and Italy suffered deaths. But what I didn't know was that Denmark, which of course has found itself very much in Donald Trump's sights this week, Denmark was the biggest per capita contributor to this hideous death toll. In terms of the relationship between how many soldiers they lost and the overall total population of the country, Denmark was had the highest per head death toll among coalition forces in Afghanistan. And this is what Donald Trump had to say yesterday.
But the problem with NATO is that we'll be there for them 100%. But I'm not sure that they'd be there for us. If we gave them the call, gentlemen, we are being attacked. We're under attack by such and such a nation. I know them all very well. I'm not sure that they'd be there. I know we'd be there for them. I don't know that they'd be there for us. So with all of the money we expend, with all of the blood, sweat, and tears, I don't know that they'd be there for us.
Spoiler alert, they were there. It gets worse.
There's one thing I heard you say yesterday and today. You were not absolutely sure that the Europeans would come to the rescue of the US if you will be attacked. Let me tell you, they will. And they did in Afghanistan, as you know, for every American who paid the ultimate, for every 2 Americans who paid the ultimate price, there was one soldier from another NATO country who did not come back to his family. From the Netherlands, from Denmark, particularly from other countries. So you can be assured, absolutely, if ever the US will be under attack, your allies will be with you. Absolutely, there's an absolute guarantee. I really want to tell you that because it is important. It pains me if you think it is not. And under your leadership, this alliance is stronger than ever.
So a normal human being would realise that they'd been misinformed, right? A normal human being would register the fact that they had accidentally said something hideous. They had insulted the memory of war dead. I know what you're thinking. He's done it before, James. He did it to American Gold Star families. He did it to the grieving mother and father of a dead American soldier. Yeah, but he was black, you see, so an awful lot of people who love the racism, the misogyny and the climate change denial, they didn't really care. If you sat here saying, how can somebody who would want to be president of the United States of America insult the memory of a Gold Star soldier from the US military? And people would say, oh, you've got Trump derangement syndrome, because that guy was black. But now he's done it to 457 British men and women, members of the armies and the military services of other allies as well, as Mark Rutger, the head of NATO, explained to Donald Trump there. So Donald Trump would change his tune, right? And if he were to, for example, pop up on Fox News a few minutes later to be interviewed, he wouldn't dare, or he wouldn't dream. No normal human being would dream of not just failing to retreat from the previously established position, but to actually go further into the horrific sacrifice, maligning lies.
I've always said, well, they'd be there if we ever needed them, and that's really the ultimate test, and I'm not sure of that. I know that we would have been there, or we would be there, but will they be there? And let's hope that that never happens. We've never needed them. We have never really asked anything of them. You know, they'll say they sent some troops to Afghanistan or this or that. And they did. They stayed a little off the front lines. But we've been very good to Europe and to many other countries. And, you know, now under my administration, that began because we had a very successful first term. That began then, but it has to be a two-way street.
He's so thick, isn't he? I mean, he's so hideously ignorant. Not in a conventional sense. Obviously, he possesses some diabolical genius. Otherwise, he wouldn't have risen to the top of the power pyramid of the Western world. But he's so stupid. He's so proud of his stupidity. He's too stupid to realise how stupid he is, which, as Dunning-Kruger explained a few years ago, can be something of a superpower. But that you heard correctly. You may, as a military family, be hearing this for the first time. The President of the United States of America has described our contribution to the 20-year deployment in Afghanistan as involving staying away from the front lines and not really helping. And I don't know if you can tell from my voice. What do you do with this? How many times this week, let alone this year, have we had to chronicle something so completely at odds with everything that we used to hold dear that you can't quite believe that you're doing it? I don't even know how we do this. Do we say, is this the worst thing he's ever done? Is this the worst thing he's ever done? In the context of the so-called special relationship, in the context of NATO membership, in the context of Article 5, in the context of losing your life in the service of, as it was during that 20-year deployment, Queen and country. And then to have the commander-in-chief of our biggest ally, according to every sense, every definition of that word, the commander-in-chief of our biggest ally, to empty ashtrays over our graves, to deny that that sacrifice was even made. I don't feel angry. I feel a bit... I didn't know how I was going to feel because I process stuff off air like a normal person, and then I process it again on air sometimes, as if it doesn't become completely real until I'm sharing it with you and wondering how we are going to respond and react to this. And the question of, is this the worst thing he's ever done? I thought I would be spluttering now and smashing the desk and barking into the microphone as I have done on some mornings this week. But I think I'm numb. Because so January the 6th, right? You know that I thought that was it. That was the moment where I thought all the cheerleaders, all the butt kissers, all the apologists, I thought they would all somehow retreat from their support for him, which we can only really understand as something that can be sustained only according to how much you love the racism, the misogyny and the climate change denial. There is no other way to make sense of Donald Trump's support. They love the racism, they love the misogyny, they love the climate change denial in equal in unequal proportion. For every Donald Trump apologist, whether they are writing columns in UK newspapers or whether they are sitting in his cabinet or whether they're voting for him, the way that you can close your eyes to the hideousness is because you love the hideousness. I've got an example for you later this programme that provides, the most unimaginably powerful proof that the cruelty is the point. Even I've had to triple check it. Eleanor and I triple checked this morning that this was actually real and true. It is an example of cruelty being the entire point, so utterly incontrovertible that you too will think that we may have been misled or we may have been duped. I'll share that with you later in the programme. But I thought on January the 6th that it would be the moment of absolute unity. Everybody would come together. Whether they'd appeared on The Apprentice with him in the United States of America or written newspaper columns about how wonderful he was or just followed whatever line Rupert Murdoch was telling his employees, past and present, to follow. I just thought everyone would say, you can't do this. You can't launch an insurrection in the United States of America. You know, the land of George Washington, Alexander Hamilton. You can't launch an armed insurrection while lying about the results of a democratic election. And it didn't happen. It happened a bit. There was quite a lot of pushback. It's easy to forget that because they've tried to rewrite history subsequently. And then you rewind to January of last year and the pardons that became something of an avalanche. Almost immediately he'd got his feet through the door of the White House for the second time. He started pardoning the people who were baying for the blood of police officers and politicians in the Capitol. And you thought then, well, surely now, how seductive can the lure of racism, misogyny and climate change denial really be? How addictive and intoxicating can those three anomalies, how can they, because if you don't suffer from this condition, you've got no idea what it's like. I love the racism. I don't really care about the racism, but I love the misogyny. The sooner women are back in their place, not allowed to have sexual autonomy, staying at home, looking after that, the sooner women are back in their 19th century roles, then the better for all concerned. And then, of course, the climate change denial, which is the most commercially driven element of it all. But those three things give you the the ability to look the other way, the ability to sit comfortably with it. And here we are now, with him actually insulting the war dead. And I don't know. I don't know what you do. Getting angry doesn't achieve anything. Explaining it all, repeating it all, looking the other way. I mean, it is absolutely extraordinary. I'm going to play you that clip again because you could be forgiven for not quite believing your ears. The Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America, the country that triggered Article 5 of NATO and saw allies joining them in their 20-year deployment in Afghanistan, and in the case of hundreds of troops and other personnel, making the ultimate sacrifice, giving their lives on battlefields and elsewhere in support of their alliance with NATO and in support of the United States of America. And their Commander-in-Chief just said this.
I've always said, will they be there if we ever needed them? And that's really the ultimate test. And I'm not sure of that. I know that we would have been there, or we would be there. But will they be there? And let's hope that that never happens. We've never needed them. We have never really asked anything of them. You know, they'll say they sent some troops to Afghanistan or this or that. And they did. They stayed a little back, a little off the front lines. But we've been very good to Europe and to many other countries. And, you know, now under my administration, that began because we had a very successful first term. That began then, but it has to be a two-way street.
Do you think Putin told him that? Where on earth would the President of the United States of America get the idea that NATO allies somehow held back from the front line? Where would he get that idea from? Do you think Vladimir Putin told him that? You can spot the traitors in our midst by the way they talk about NATO. Oh, by the way, I've got Nigel Farage's statement on this subject for you just in a few moments, his condemnation of Donald Trump, because obviously a massive patriot like Nigel Farage would have a lot to say about this. So I'll play that for you shortly. But where would he get this idea that the NATO allies in Afghanistan had been less than committed to the cause? I honestly don't think he could have made it up himself, could he? Somebody has told him this, and it's unlikely to be anybody involved in the military. It's unlikely to be anybody American. I honestly think that the best case scenario, that the Occam's razor resolution to this issue is that Vladimir Putin told him this, knowing what an idiot he is, that he would believe it if it suited him to pretend or indeed to believe it. The question, obviously, and I don't always like obvious questions, but some days it would be remiss of me to ask you any other, is how you respond to this, particularly as a military family, particularly if, and God forbid, I don't even know if I want to encourage you to ring in if you did lose someone, but if you want to talk to me about how you respond to this extraordinary moment, because it is, and that's the thing you have to hang on to. That's where you have to resist the numbness, because it is a beyond comprehension moment. It's a moment of unutterable horror. It really is. We need to keep reminding each other of that. You know, probably even now it's time to stop mocking the hideous characters who used Trump derangement syndrome as an insult or tried to. We need to focus on how utterly awful these moments are, because you know, the really, really bad stuff, that 5-year-old boy who was captured, kidnapped, call it what you will, by ICE. Happily, that has received rather more coverage since I told you about it yesterday and pointed out that it fits almost entirely with Anne Frank's description of what was happening in Amsterdam during the actual Holocaust. You know, the rounding up of people. Terrible things are happening outside, she wrote. Children are coming home from school to find their parents gone. That literally happened in Minneapolis this week. So you can't become numb. You can't become normalized. You can't become complacent just because the thing that happened yesterday was gross. You can't let it dilute the grossness of what happened today. And that's why I'm going to hand over to you in a minute and just ask you to tell me, just straight up, traditional radio phone-in response to what you have just heard from the powerful man in the world, from the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America, from the successor to the Commander-in-Chief that triggered Article 5 of NATO and called upon British, Danish, French, German troops to join them in Afghanistan, and in hundreds and hundreds of cases to make the ultimate sacrifice, to die in pursuit of a military goal set by the United States of America, and now to have the Commander-in-Chief say they didn't really do anything. I actually feel sick. They didn't really do anything. They didn't really go to the front line. Remember the footage of Prince Harry giving an interview, I think, to the BBC, and the alarm goes off at Camp Bastion and he's out of there like a rat up a drain pipe. No questions, no apologies, no nothing. Takes off the microphone, sprints, runs. Be interesting to see how all the columnists who have given Prince Harry a hard time over the last few years will be ranting. I know they will, because they have to, right? There are pages that will have been written to when we finally get around to having a look at what Dick Littlejohn has had to say about this in the Daily Mail today. You're going to be able to warm your hands from 100 feet away at the scale of his anger and his horror at what his previous hero, Donald Trump, has done to the memories of Britain's war dead. But I want to know what you think of it first. 0345 6060 973. And I'm not going to let you. Don't let your disgust be diluted by the fact that there's so much to be disgusted about. Because this has got to be among the worst things he's ever done. And he's done it, this time, to us. It's 10:25.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I hope this is appropriate. I think the technical term is trauma disassociating. I think Aidan brought home there that this is traumatic, especially for people who have served in the military. God knows how the families of people who died in Afghanistan are dealing with the fact that the man in charge, ultimately the commander-in-chief of that operation, has said they didn't really do much. That's trauma. That is proper trauma. I think you can be traumatised hearing about it, talking about it, and you disassociate from it because trauma is hard. Trauma is horrible. So you do trauma. That's, I think, what we've been trying to nail down over the course of this week. I find it unbearable, this conversation. I can't tell you how much I envy the people who can turn up, shoot their mouth off for 3 hours and go home. I know that there are people listening to this in tears, like Aidan. I know that there are families who would never phone a radio station in a billion years, who are dealing with a horror and a pain that is unimaginable. And I know that they then have to turn to huge swathes of the UK media and see people who've been cheering on Donald Trump for the best part of a decade. But the trauma today comes from the relationship that we have with military sacrifice, the relationship that we're encouraged to have, the thoughts that we hold in our hearts and sometimes share when we wear poppies or when we commemorate anniversaries of battles or of ceasefires, particularly in the context of the Second World War, from the ashes of which NATO rose. And NATO is, or was, the bulwark against that kind of horror, a repeat of that kind of horror. Not only is Trump undermining and dismantling it, but in doing so, he's insulting the people who made the ultimate sacrifice. Anyway, I say this every day at the moment. I'm talking too much. I want to hear more from you. Phone lines are open. There's a couple of phone lines free still. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. John is in Glasgow. John, what would you like to say?
I phoned up to initially tell about, obviously, Josh Leakey VC. Yeah. He was a friend. I've not seen him in years. I hope he would still be a friend. It would be great if you could read out his citation.
Okay. Shall I do it now?
Yeah, I'll let you evaluate it.
No, you don't need to. I actually had it in front of me, John, by coincidence. Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's the citation, but I've got what he said, and then I've got the description of what happened. When you hear there's a man down, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Clearly then your plans change. Realising the seriousness of the situation and with complete disregard for his own safety, he dashed across a large area of barren hillside, being raked with machine gun fire. As he crested the hill, the full severity of the situation became apparent. Approximately 20 enemy had surrounded 2 friendly machine gun teams and a mortar section, rendering their critical fire support ineffective. Under fire, yet undeterred by the very clear and present danger, Lance Corporal Leakey ran across the exposed slope of the hill 3 times to initiate casualty evacuation, re-sight machine guns and return fire. His actions proved the turning point, inspiring his comrades to fight back with renewed ferocity, displaying gritty leadership well above that expected of his rank. Lance Corporal Leakey's actions single-handedly regained the initiative and prevented considerable loss of life. And it was the United States Marine Corps who were holding the positions that he evacuated the casualties from. Or, to paraphrase the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America, he held back from the front line, John.
I want to also say that Josh didn't do his actions thinking that he would be awarded the highest honour. He did it for the overarching good, the right thing to do. I joined in 2001 and was part of the invasion in 2003. I was unfortunately medically discharged in 2017 for complex PTSD. Everything just caught up with me.
Of course, I'm sorry.
That's not your fault. We can't go back and change things. I don't know. I'm really angry. Sorry.
Don't apologise.
Trump is a war dodger, and he is in no position to comment on anybody's bravery. He's a coward, and when I watched the media, I think he feels like he's part of these operations that have happened recently. It increases his masculinity as a leader.
The psychological makeup of the man is something we could probably going to spend the rest of our lives trying to unravel.
I agree,
but I can't quite, and I don't even know if it's appropriate to invite you to try. But how could he get such a hideously wrong idea about recent history and very well recorded history?
I think the lack of him actually being interested in it, his team around him. I just wanted to bring up the other points I raised here, researcher, and that.
Yeah, go on.
In Helmand, the Americans couldn't get onto the ground without British soldiers being there. So they were stuck behind their fences or whatever, razor wire, and it had to take British troops being part of their operation to get them to get into combat. And this is quite I would say a heartwarming story. In my last tour of Afghanistan, my mum used to send out caramel shortbread.
Yeah.
And the Americans, there's only a few of them, loved it. And that was it became a barter sort of trade situation. I would trade for, it was a brand called Rip It, high caffeine drinks, and also clothing, and they would take most of the caramel shortbread, and that's what the relationship was like. It was a brotherhood, for the greater cause. I can't we had similar values, what people will think of Afghanistan in the future, I can't predict, but being in it, and not being political, it was there was just a connection.
And it's interesting. That's two veterans now that I've spoken to who have gone on to the question that I was really thinking about at 10 o'clock this morning, and the question of what the alliance is about, what the actual relationship is all about, what marching, fighting under the same flag, as it were, a NATO flag, as it were, was about, because that's something the rest of us never really think about, never really know about, and it makes what Trump has said and what Trump has done even more offensive, even more obnoxious. My
personal opinion is that the UK needs to completely cut ties with America and not be reliant on them, and with Europe recreate the infrastructure needed to replace what American sometimes provided for us.
And we've been talking about that since Putin went into Ukraine, actually, or at least since Trump got back into the White House and it became clear that his commitment to Ukraine was at the very least questionable, although, of course, yesterday, and we may get onto this later in the programme, Volodymyr Zelensky was very, very critical about the role that Europe is currently playing in the support for Ukraine, which I think is probably evidentially true, but it's going to reach some ears very uncomfortably on this side of the Atlantic, on this side of Europe. John, thank you. It's quite an American thing to do and to say, but I think on days like today, it's probably appropriate for me also to say thank you for your service and look after yourself. But the ignorance, the actual ignorance in the purest sense of the word, the ignorance of just not knowing stuff, let alone the ignorance in the broader sense of the word of insulting our war dead, but the ignorance of not knowing stuff. And the case of Lance Corporal Joshua Leakey being absolutely front and centre in response to the claim that NATO allies didn't do much and held back from the front line during that 20-year deployment in Afghanistan that was undertaken only as a consequence of our NATO membership and the United States being the only member ever to trigger Article 5, by which everybody is required to respond, every signatory. 10:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
48 is the time. It is. I'm grateful to Emma for introducing me to that phrase, trauma disassociation. And you can dress it up in media terms like flooding the zone or dead cats, but the idea that you are just disappearing in a tidal wave of filth, so you can't properly focus on how hideous the latest example of filth is. But what Trump said about our troops yesterday is actually beyond belief. I guess that supporters will have to do what Orwell told them to do and ignore the evidence of their eyes and ears in order to somehow cling to the idea that they haven't sullied themselves and whatever organs they work for or whatever institutions they represent by failing to see what the rest of us could see so clearly even before he became president the first time. But there it is. Anne is in Cambridge. Anne, what made you pick up the phone?
I was just on my way back from a yin yoga class and I heard you mention the word trauma, and I am traumatised. I am an ex-military mum. My son was in the Royal Marines. He did 3 tours of Afghanistan before his 19th birthday. His first tour was in Sangin, operating from a patrol base and a FOB, a forward operating base. So not at all on the front line.
Holding back from the front line, Anne, I think is the phrase we use today.
Yeah, he didn't hold back from the front line. When he had the opportunity to phone me, they used the satellite phone, but when there was a death, they used to go on to what they called minimised. So there was no contact, so that they could inform the families. And I never knew whether it was going to be me, whether they were going to be waiting outside my door.
Oh, my days.
So when he could phone me, I had to pay. I think they got so many minutes on the satellite phone free. And but I paid extra so that he could speak to me and his girlfriend when he was able to. And he used to say things to me like, "Did you hear that, Mum?" I said, "No, what are you talking about?" Well, he didn't tell me, but he told his stepdad that it was a bullet going past his head. Not at all on the front line.
Wow.
He then, when he came home, he then did 2 further tours of Afghanistan with SB, special boats, special services, and I didn't even have a clue where he is. And at one point I asked him where he was. He said, "You can't expect me to answer that." Things like I used to go and visit my parents, just to reassure his grandparents that he was okay. And before I even went to see my parents, I had to tell his company, his unit, where I was in case he was killed.
Because they would have to be able to find you to tell you?
Yes.
So it's a constant. I don't think that those of us on Civvy Street fully appreciate that constant nature of fear. It's it's ever present.
And as I was a teacher, and I'm retired now, and every time we did a, Remembrance Day assembly, I couldn't go into the assembly because I was just so traumatised by the whole remembrance thing. I also taught English literature, and one of the poems we had to teach was Poppies, and my colleagues wouldn't let me teach it. They had to teach my lessons because of the trauma that all brought back to me.
And it's the only word to use.
I am traumatised.
Of course you're traumatised. I said trauma is the only word to use, isn't it?
I am traumatised today. I am very much traumatised. This whole thing has triggered me to an extent that I'm quite shocked about.
Because you, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but because you can just about process what you went through with the knowledge of what a noble thing your boy was doing.
Yes.
And to have the Commander-in-Chief of the United States say it wasn't noble at all is absolutely... I mean, I don't know what word to use to describe it.
Well, no, I'm not even insulted. I've always thought that Trumpy wasn't a sentient being. I've always sort of worked that one out. But now I've upgraded my assessment of him from absolute lunatic to an unprintable, I can't say it on the radio.
No, don't. I mean, well, you can if you want, but it'll be me. It'll be me that gets into trouble with Ofcom, not you. Although we know that Keith's very good at hitting the correct button. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry that you're going through this today, and I hesitate to say this, but I could you imagine what it would be like for a mum whose son didn't come back?
Well, no, I can't because it's just I can't. And if I feel insulted, those women, those girlfriends, those sisters, those wives, what he has done to them is it's not even inexcusable. And it will be really interesting when the King goes to visit on their state visit in April, because his son served in Afghanistan as well. And there is actually film of Harry leaving an interview to go and join his unit because they were under attack.
There is. I've watched it a few times, and I often think of it when I see the kicking that he's getting from members of the British media that have never been near a front line in their life, and never been near a war zone in their life, and yet they're sitting in judgment of his courage and integrity on an almost daily basis. And you don't have to answer this, and I'm not sure I should even ask, but how is your son? Is he all right?
Oh, he's fine.
Oh, good.
I mean, the point is, he was Royal Marine, the King's Badgeman.
Wow.
So, he was pretty good at what he did. He won the Young Navy Sports Personality of the Year. He's an exemplary young man. I never fail to feel so proud of my son. And now he's a critical care nurse working in the NHS.
Bloody hell, you must have done something right.
I know. All right? So, so the draft dodger with three sons who have done absolutely nothing with their lives except hang on the biggest example of NEPO babies in the world. Yeah. And tells me that my son didn't do his bit, and he is still doing his bit.
I mean, it's not for you and me now. It's certainly not for you to worry about such things. But where on earth would that come from? It's so unnecessary to say. Yeah. He can talk. Yeah. He can be critical of NATO, albeit that it's a Kremlin talking point to be critical of NATO. He can, we know he never does anything that a Kremlin place wouldn't do in the White House. If Vladimir Putin had personally selected a president, he couldn't have done anything different from what Donald Trump has done. But why would he say that about NATO allies, about actual troops, about your son, Anne?
Well, I know. Well, as I say, he's gone, he's not even a sentient being, we know that, but now he's proved it. He's just, I've got a dear, beloved aunt who's 85 and has got Alzheimer's, and she makes more sense than he does.
I can't believe you made me laugh at the end of this. Yeah. You almost made me cry 2 minutes ago. Yeah. Absolutely extraordinary. Anne, thank you. Are you all right? Is there anything else you want to say?
I'm all right. I've just done my yin yoga class, and now
we've undone all that, haven't we, in the space of a single radio programme? Maybe you need to go back for a top-up.
No, I'm going to put a bottle of wine in the fridge. It's not too early, is it?
No, it's not too early to pop it in the fridge, Anne, although, I think sometimes Friday evening can't come around soon enough. Thank you so much. And also for humanising, not that it needs much humanising, but to speak to military veterans and then to the mother of somebody who is every single day, I can't imagine that. Every single day, every time the doorbell goes. It's just there, isn't it? I mean, it is that possibility. Can't go and visit your own parents without telling them where you're going because they may need to send around for delivering them the worst imaginable but constantly feared news. And then to hear, I think it's right to keep referring to him as the Commander-in-Chief. I can't believe it. We've been talking about it for an hour, and I actually can't believe this has happened. And, you know, all the other questions that we've been asking almost every day for a year, what should Keir Starmer do? How should Keir Starmer handle this? You see how those questions get less loud every time a disgusting thing happens. Imagine if Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, George Bush, Ronald Reagan, imagine if any of them had denigrated the memory of British war dead. Imagine if you really, like me, have a particular animus for the right-wing newspapers in this country. Imagine if Barack Obama had done it. What do you think would be on the front page of the Daily Mail today? Do you think it would be a story about Andy Burnham and an invitation to read about a mum who used to take ketamine? No mention at all. Oh, and Brooklyn Beckham. If Barack Obama had maligned the memory of British war dead, what do you think our right-wing newspapers would be doing today, or indeed our right-wing blowhards and commentators and broadcasters? I would be as outraged and as disgusted as I am by Donald Trump doing it, because it isn't about who has done it, it is about what has been done. But of course the difference would be nobody is surprised by this. Nobody thinks it's out of character, nobody thinks it's remarkable. We are shocked once again, but not surprised. And we find ourselves or at least I do, registering the fact that because we are so used to the trauma, we are now responding to it differently. We're not demanding comments from Downing Street. I mean, how has Downing Street not said anything yet? I know the ministers on the broadcast rounds have done it, but isn't this a moment, really, for Downing Street to actually intervene and do something? The Palace? I don't know, because there is no precedent. There's no rule book to follow. But I do know that if this had come out of the blue, if this had occurred in a period of normality, then the reaction would be off the charts. But because it's occurred as the latest in a very long line of hideousness, the latest in a very long line of unconscionable conduct, the reaction is a bit muted. Well, not here. 0345 60 60 973 is the number you need. Daz in Norwich reminds me that Barack Obama got slated for moving a statue of Winston Churchill. But so far, nothing from all the people. Oh, that's not true. I do actually have a statement from Donald Trump's biggest supporter and fan in this country, Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK. This is what he has to say about his hero and great friend insulting the memory of 457 British people who died in Afghanistan. It's 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:03. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. This is from Stu. James, I was deployed to Afghanistan in 2006-07 on Operation Herrick 5. We had the Danish under our command. Our area of operations was Helmand, and with the Estonians, the Danes, and our own Royal Marine battle groups, we had one of the most active areas in Afghanistan at that time. Yes, we had US forces in our area too, but firstly, in an insurgency such as that, there is no front line. And secondly, all troops were in constant contact with the insurgents wherever they were and fought bravely and with distinction. I'm sure the US military community will be aware of that. And I think some former US generals have come forward to condemn what Donald Trump has said, but it's scant consolation to the people dealing with this extraordinary intervention from the man who is the commander-in-chief. And if you're just joining us, and you're not quite familiar with this story, and I imagine, and I've said this to you a few times, you probably aren't going to believe me when I tell you, but you don't have to believe me, because you can listen to Donald Trump being interviewed on Fox News yesterday saying this.
I've always said, will they be there if we ever needed them? And that's really the ultimate test, and I'm not sure of that. I know that we would have been there, or we would be there, but will they be there? And let's hope that that never happens. We've never needed them. We have never really asked anything of them. You know, they'll say they sent some troops to Afghanistan or this or that. And they did. They stayed a little off the front lines. But we've been very good to Europe and to many other countries. And, you know, now under my administration, that began because we had a very successful first term. That began then, but it has to be a two-way street.
held back from the front line. Your responses, your reactions to that simple statement. Before that, I just need to clear something up. I played the wrong clip a moment ago. I said Nigel Farage had made a statement about Donald Trump in this hideous moment, and we accidentally played some sort of tumbleweed sound effect. Here's the real clip.
This is the single most resilient and bravest person I have ever met in my life.
Oh, Keith, mate, you're going to get me into trouble. Can we be sure to get it right this time?
He is simply the bravest man that I know, and we should all applaud him.
Okay, now for the final time, this is categorically what Nigel Farage has had to say on the subject of his hero, and indeed the bravest man he's ever met, maligning the memory of British soldiers who died in the service of their country. I mean, to be fair to Farage, I doubt he's ever met any of them, but this is what he actually had to say about the bravest man he's ever met, maligning the memories of our own war dead. Absolutely nothing. James is in Market Harborough. James, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Army reservist, served in Afghanistan for 7 months, back end of 2011, 2012. Lost 3 of my team who were the Afghan locally employed civilians. Stood on the square at Camp Bastion for probably about 26 repatriations of people that died. Having listened to what Anne said to you earlier on, there are now tens of thousands of parents who lost people, had their loved ones injured, are going through the exact same trauma that I'm going through, and I came back with PTSD. So hearing what the Orange Clown said, my emotions are just all over the place, James. I don't know what to think. It's a mixture of anger, disappointment, sickness, and I hope to God that all the servicemen in the UK, American servicemen in the UK, are listening to this right now and not venturing out of their fences, because I know it's not their fault, but he's their commander-in-chief, and look what he's done to us. Look how he's denigrated the memory of what we've all been through. He's a fool.
I mean, they won't. I mean, you will know better than I do that they won't really be allowed to do anything, will they? If they're still in service, they won't be allowed to speak out against the commander-in-chief. And we know how Donald Trump's administration deals with dissent anyway. I think they're trying to pursue criminal action against a senator who simply advised members of the armed forces not to obey illegal orders when they were blowing up people on no evidence in the ocean off Venezuela. What can he do? I mean, what even do you think was going through his mind? This is the bit I'm struggling with. Is it normally you can say, oh, I can see why he's done that, and I can see why he's done that, but what on earth has he? What on earth has he done this for?
Well, it kind of takes you back to primary school when you have the schoolyard bully who just goes round and just picks on everybody, steals their sweets, tells everyone else that they're an idiot and look how brave I am. But really, that's doing injustice to 5-year-olds, really, isn't it? I mean,
it is.
What was he thinking? It's just, it just blows my mind, and it'll be blowing the mind of all my brothers and sisters in the British forces, the Danish forces, Estonian forces, and all the rest of us who served on ISAF in Afghanistan, on Op Herrick. What can you say, really?
I don't know, but it's important to say something, isn't it? It's important to say something.
To be honest, James, I hope that His Majesty does not go to America, because all that will happen is that he'll play into Trump's little story of, oh, look at me, I'm I'm here with, all these important people. Please, Your Majesty, don't go to America. Don't become one of his photo shoots. And remember what your son went through, and remember what tens of thousands of the rest of us who serve in the armed forces did. And, don't humour him.
Yeah, and taking your call in conjunction with Anne's. And that notion, I hadn't thought about that before, that the king would have been living with the fear of losing his son, in the same way that all military families know that the knock on the door could come at any moment. The helicopter Harry was in could have been shot out of the sky by the Taliban. And
he could have been killed by mortar, James, the same way that many of us who were at Helmand, at Kandahar, at Kabul, the alarm goes off and you run for the collective protection, and you don't know whether, that mortar has got your name on it. Thankfully, not many did, but there were still all the IEDs and all the snipers, and they're the ones that killed my 3 Afghans. And, 22 over the time we were there, and the same number were critically injured.
And here he is. I haven't got the vocabulary to describe what he's done. I can use words like insulting or maligning or sullying, but they don't actually feel strong enough. And I'm not just saying that for effect. I'm saying it because I don't think the word malign is enough. There's some rude words I could use to describe what he's done, but I'm not sure they would be sufficient either. Thank you, James. Thank you. For everything. 11 minutes after 11 is the time. We will move on a bit, perhaps this hour, although I'm not going to really move on until I sense that I don't have a long queue of people wanting to do what James has done and what Anne has done and what Aidan has done and what everyone has done this morning, which is to get stuff off their chest in response to, I think, the single most hideous intervention in British life ever undertaken by a US president. Do you remember when the various ghouls and idiots were queuing up to condemn Barack Obama for making comments about what our trade relationship with the country he was governing would be in the event of us leaving the European Union? They couldn't wait. It was extraordinary, the vituperative nature of much of the coverage. In fact, that reminds me, we must have a look at what Richard Littlejohn in the Daily Mail has had to say about this, because he's a big patriot. He once compared Nigel Farage to a Spitfire captain after Brexit. He loves the military, loves his military analogies even, loves this country, despite not living here for much of his career, really loves this country, old Dick Littlejohn. So we'll turn to his column shortly and find out what he has to say about this hideous intervention from a man who only last week he was telling us he wished, actually I think it was this week, he wished was in charge of the United Kingdom. And that was after Renee Nicole Good was shot in the face by ICE agents. But before that, and much more importantly, Trevor is in New Eltham. Trevor, what would you like to say?
Only my daughter joined the British Army just under a year ago.
Crikey.
And, she's good. And she's a square peg in a square hole. It fits her.
I get it. I'm sorry. I understood. Yeah. I've not heard that phrase before, but I've not heard it doctored that way before, Trevor. Yeah. But of course I understand what it means.
Yeah, and to say we're proud of her is an understatement. And we've talked to the family that once she's finished her training, and if this peace process goes off, she could well be deployed to Ukraine. And I try and reassure mainly my wife that being the case, she'd be there with the support and the backup of her allies, and obviously America is the main one. And for me currently, those words just feel hollow.
Because this is such a profound undermining of the status quo, of the bonds of trust, really, the bonds of obligation that hold military alliances together.
Yeah, and there's actually a plaque in her barracks where commemorating the fact that was the holding point for the repatriated soldiers when they came back from Afghanistan before they made their final journey through Royal Warden Bassett. Yeah. There's a plaque commemorating them in the barracks that she lives.
Wow.
And also, my final thing is, in a previous life, I had cause to go to Headley Court, where I saw those that came back, not only physically but mentally scarred. And it's heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking objectively that it happened, but the fact that it's compounded today by these comments is... I hadn't thought of the wider ramifications for people currently serving, about the confidence they can have in their allies. And again, it's not about the men and women in uniform, it's about the Commander-in-Chief and what he does and represents. But I hope you're still proud of your daughter.
And I know in a heartbeat she'd go not to support anyone other than her colleagues that are with her. She'd be there for them.
And that's the point. And the Commander-in-Chief, theoretically, should be in that same bracket. It should be one of the people who is on the same side, one of the people who is part of the same cause, not in battle, obviously, but in essence, in philosophy, in principle, that they are fighting together. And he has just insulted everybody who isn't American. He's insulted every NATO soldier, every sailor, every airman or woman in a NATO country that isn't American has been insulted by Donald Trump today in the most hideous way, because, of course, it was the United States that remains the only NATO member ever to have activated Article 5, by which all members are required to act as one. It didn't happen during Iraq. Canada and France didn't go. Other countries didn't go. Our history has probably taught us that we shouldn't have gone. But here we are. It's 11:16.
James O'Brien on LBC.
15 minutes after 11, you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's not just me and you today. I'll be delighted to tell you I'll be joined by Emily Maitlis at about 11:45 today, so later this hour, who is just back from Minnesota, just back from Minneapolis, and will be able to provide us with, I think, a much-needed account of exactly what is going on the ground there. And then at 12:30, as scheduled, currently, Simon Marks will join us live from Washington, D.C. to look at, well, I mean, how many times have we had Simon on the programme without even knowing where to start? But I am interested, among other things, in the testimony that Jack Smith was giving to Congress yesterday with regards to Trump's attempts to steal the 2020 election. Another one of those moments where you would have thought that everybody minded to cheer for him would have changed their minds, which brings us, of course, to Dick Littlejohn, the Daily Mail columnist, who earlier this week was explaining why he'd rather be led by Trump than Keir Starmer, and who has got a column in the paper today, so we can see what he's got to say about Donald Trump insulting the memory of the British war dead. I'll read it cold. What have Liverpool and Scotland football legend Kenny Dalglish and the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, got in common? It's a strange intro for a piece about how disgusting it is to malign the memories of dead British soldiers. They're just two of more than 1 million motorists who have fallen foul of recently introduced 20-mile-per-hour limits. This is the star columnist of the country's best-selling newspaper on the day after the President of the United States of America insulted every member of our military, every member of every military in NATO except the United States. Maybe it's a sort of... Dalglish was caught driving at 30 miles per hour in Little Crosby on Merseyside, which would have been perfectly legal a few weeks... What a columnist is asked by their editor every time they have a column due is what are you most animated by today? What are you most exercised by? What are you most angered by? But also sometimes what are you most delighted by? What do you think is the most important issue facing you, your readers, your country at the moment? And they asked Dick Littlejohn that question yesterday, the day that Donald Trump chose to insult 457 dead British people killed in Afghanistan during a 20-year deployment undertaken at the behest of the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America. And Richard Littlejohn, Dick to his friends, if he has any, decided it's 20-mile-per-hour speed limits. I said it before, I say it again. If it wasn't enough to boast about being a sex offender, if it wasn't enough to be a multiple felon, if it wasn't enough to insult the Gold Star family of Humayun Khan, killed in 2004 in Iraq, but his parents insulted by Donald Trump during his first campaign, it wasn't enough to incite an insurrection, it wasn't enough to... all of those things. I wonder if this will be enough. What was the deal, I wonder, mentally, intellectually or philosophically, to decide to write about 20 miles per hour speed limits instead of the thing that the rest of the world is currently most exercised, animated, angered by? 21 minutes after 11 is the time. George is in Guildford. George, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I was a sergeant major in Afghanistan, and I was in part of a unit which I don't really want to mention.
Of course.
And myself and a colleague were embedded with the 82nd Airborne on a major operation in Afghanistan in 2007, I think it was.
Yeah.
And I was leading a stick going onto the Chinook helicopters along with a battalion of others. And my helicopter, or the helicopter that was coming back from me, was shot down. And so I was waiting for another helicopter with all the troops behind me. And when we got onto our replacement helicopter, we had Apache escorts taking us in. And we were being shot at from the ground because I was connected to the pilot with headphones because I was the chalk commander. So to say that British soldiers weren't in the front line is really insulting.
I think that you're a master of understatement this morning, George.
Yeah, my wife was, she knew that I was on a major operation, so you can't tell her anything. And then she saw on the 10 o'clock news that a Chinook helicopter had been shot down.
Oh, boy.
And so she tried to contact my unit, who then had to contact the Ministry of Defence to try and find if I was a casualty. And because I wasn't on the casualty list, all they could say was that I'm not on the casualty list. And she couldn't find out whether I was alive for another 2 weeks when the operation finished. And I just wanted to add that in Iraq, my unit had the first female soldier to be killed in Iraq, Corporal Sarah Bryant, and obviously she was on the front line as well. And I'm just incensed, to be honest.
Do you? I mean, I think this is probably a question we'll never be able to answer, let alone today. But have we got any inkling of what he thought he was doing when he did? I mean, in his own warped mind, what was he hoping to achieve with this comment? Because he's done it again and again. It's not as if he's had the chance to go, oops. He's doubled down on it, as he often, if not always, does.
I just sometimes think that you have to think about the target audience that he's speaking to. It's not for us. It's for, I think, a lot of the American people that don't tend to travel anywhere. Most of them have got passports. I don't think they're as worldly wise and engaged with world affairs as say.
No, but they revere their military, and I mean sometimes to a degree that I think Europeans or certainly Brits might find a little bit embarrassing. They revere their military and they revere their allies. I don't know if you were listening earlier. A friend of mine was reminiscing about a visit to a tourist attraction in Orlando, and the announcer at SeaWorld asked all the veterans present to stand up, and they got a rousing round of applause. And then they asked all of the veterans from America's allies who were in the audience to stand up. And my friend said the applause, if anything, was even louder. So yes, they do have a concept of cohesion, you know, of
oh, totally right.
Fellowship.
But I think Americans got this psyche that they lead the world, and I think he's just trying to emphasise that to his own people. It's not for our benefit. It's for his own people to sort of convince them that the Americans, you know, were in the forefront of everything. They basically won the war, like he inferred in the Second World War as well. And I think the target audience is literally his own people. It's not for anybody else.
And I mean, we use the word base to describe his own people, but it's going to be a relatively small proportion of America. This is like for the true believers, for the absolute cultists who will completely ignore observable reality, recorded history. The testimony and the memory of people like you know, of whom there are many, and the statistics, the casualty statistics, the death toll, all of those things, they're not opinions, they're counting. And yet there'll be some people who cling to the carcass of his credibility so desperately that they end up ignoring the evidence of their own eyes and ears. Yeah.
I mean, I sent soldiers on patrols, and you know, one guy lost his legs because his Land Rover was blown up, and
while holding back from the front line, George. Holding back from the front line. Can you remember that? Do you want to share the names of the? No, that's fine. I just give you that opportunity, but I respect your discretion, which is not a word I think Donald Trump can spell, let alone understand the meaning of. George, thank you. I'm sorry for today. I'm sorry that this has happened, actually, to people like you and your former comrades and your current comrades. I'm really sorry that this has been inflicted upon you by the Commander-in-Chief of our greatest ally. 27 minutes after 11 is the time. John is in Glattbrugg in Switzerland. John, what would you like to say?
Good morning, sir.
Hello, John.
Wow, what could you say? I heard this yesterday, and all I could do was grip hold of the steering wheel of my truck and scream that I'm getting emotional, so I'm sorry.
Hey, listen, you can take all the time you want, all right? And you can change your mind, and you don't have to carry on talking if you don't want to. This is for you, not for anyone else.
I did 32 years in the Royal Marines. I joined in 87, left in 2014, did 3 tours of Afghanistan. Well, actually 4, Operation Jacana, and then went on to the Operics, and went through three different rank structures, finished as a colour sergeant.
Right.
Lost 9 friends.
I'm sorry.
Lost my cousin. You probably would have heard it on the TV. Gus O'Donnell, he was 5'9" commando. Yes. I've got I'm all over the place, I'm on. Is this. I'd love to stand in front of this talentless oik and say to him, you need to apologise to a nation. Because as that young lady that you spoke to, the young 19-year-old Marine, not knowing, come on, John, get a grip.
Hey, you don't need to do anything. The people that are still here, the people, because we often, we know a lot more about what you go through, not as much as we should know. But I think today, as you have picked up on, even with your military record, the experiences of the people at home waiting and not knowing, he's insulted every single one of them in the worst imaginable way as well.
Do you know something, James? Is when we go through whatever training we do and we go off and do our jobs, I would sooner do that than be sat at home in the UK and never not knowing.
Wow.
It's that I clearly, categorically tell you that is I would not want to know to the mothers out there. Sorry.
Hey.
Sorry.
They'll be some of the proudest women in the country, those mothers.
Without a doubt, James. Without a doubt. Do you know, as I said to your researcher, is this. I would love these ladies now to put some form of petition together and send that letter to the MOD to demand an apology not from the American nation, but from this guy. Because let me tell you, Mr. Trump, we will be there for you, for your countrymen, but not for you, you coward. Because you could never walk in our shoes. But we walk amongst you every single day. People like you. Because he's a coward. I remember listening to your show yesterday, and apparently I think it might not have been your show, James, but he excelled in a military school. Really? Because I'm now starting to question that. He's not a leader. He could never be a leader. Because being a leader is a very lonely path, and when it's a very lonely path, you don't come out with the words or phrases that he's come out with.
You put it perfectly. You put it so well. And I've got nothing to say to you. I mean, it's almost an insult to you to ask whether you've got the first idea about what he thought he was doing when he came out with these comments.
Do you know something, James? Every time I listen to him now, I don't even let him get past the second word. I have to turn the radio off.
Fair enough. I
do. But I have to say this on a happy note, James. And I mean this because I love listening to LBC. I've had a new radio fitted into my truck so I can get it in Swiss. and for you, sir, personally, you're an academic god.
Oh, stop it!
You teach me. I even carry a dictionary with some of the words that you come out with, and I'm looking them up and thinking, wow, that's a great word. I'm stealing that from you, James. You know what I mean? I would give anything to have your education, sir, and I wish to say thank you. Thank you.
Well, I mean, that's ridiculous, because people like me can't get the educations that we get if it isn't for people like you doing what you've done for 30
Well, it's been a pleasure, sir. It's been a pleasure.
John. All right, I'm going to have to go to the news now. You
Bye-bye.
take care as well. I thought you were the emotional one during this conversation. Dominic Ellis has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
This is the single most resilient and bravest person I have ever met in my life.
I've always said, will they be there if we ever needed them? And that's really the ultimate test. And I'm not sure of that. I know that we would have been there or we would be there. But will they be there? And let's hope that that never happens. We've never needed them. We have never really asked anything of them. You know, they'll say they sent some troops to Afghanistan or this or that. And they did. They stayed a little off the front lines. But we've been very good to Europe and to many other countries. And, you know, now under my administration, that began because we had a very successful first term. That began then, but it has to be a two-way street.
I think every call we've taken today is from a person considerably braver than the man you just heard from. Not least John, who has reached parts that other radio callers cannot reach, just to put it mildly, glancing at my inbox. And I sense just from that conversation that John is probably not the kind of man who will have much of an ego to be fed by that kind of reaction. But mate, you expressed yourself so beautifully and so powerfully that I mean, I don't do humble. You may have picked up on that over the years, but good grief, man, that was quite incredible. And we return to the reactions of good people, decent people, brave people and their families, brave families, to those comments, those absolutely extraordinary. Do you know, sometimes I sit down at 10 o'clock, don't we, and we start chatting and you listen to bits of it, you don't necessarily listen to all of it, and I feel my heart very rarely skipping a beat because the topic under discussion is so important. And so, yeah, I think we'll say traumatic or traumatising. And usually after an hour or two, I'm feeling okay again. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm worse now. I'm more emotional now than I was at 10 o'clock this morning. Because the more you talk about it, the worse it gets. And that's why it's so important to talk about it. And that is, I think, why we stop the disassociation from trauma that psychologists would describe. That's the language they would use. But you absolutely have to. I mean, you look any of these men and women in the eye, or look the ones that have died. You look at the people they've left behind in the eye and tell them that, oh, you're not going to talk. And good God, if you hear anyone use the phrase Trump derangement syndrome again, just think of John. Nina is in Bromley. Nina, what made you pick up the phone?
My son served in Afghanistan, and when he came back, I've been writing notes, and I wrote a poem for him.
Oh.
And he told me that it managed to put his feelings on paper. It expressed it for him, and I just wanted to share it with you, if I can read it.
Go on, then. Did you know, this is quite... I mean, I'm not going to make light of the moment, but this is one of the only rules on this programme is no poems, Nina, but... I'm going to break that rule. I'm going to let you break that rule into a million pieces this morning.
All right. Well, I should do my best for my son to read it out to you. Okay. The moment passed in silence, but felt deafened with our tears. You tried to hide your feelings, but in your eyes I saw your fears. I never felt so helpless, watching you walk away alone. A sickling feeling in my heart. Will my boy come home? The silhouette of a soldier left me, the man I do not know. I can no longer protect him, just give a piece of my heart to let him go. In your voice I heard such terror, but you always stayed so brave. Where did you find the strength, my love, while you were watching your fellows fall to their grave? For 6 months my life was lived in a bubble, going through the motions, but frozen inside. A total living nightmare, but the bubble was made up of pride. You are now part of history, a Marine held in high esteem. Never once as I cradled you as a baby did such a hero I ever dream. I now realise how scared we were, because the fear has gone away. And to all those fallen soldiers, forever we shall pray. And that was for my son.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
And I'm disgusted today by Donald Trump's comments. And I never ring into things like this, but I was so disgusted.
Well, I'm glad you did ring in today. And I understand that this intervention from Donald Trump has affected people in ways that the news doesn't normally affect people. And it will have affected people like you more than the rest of us. I mean, everybody is disgusted, but you carry something that I don't think we can understand unless we've been there. And Anna earlier, the other mother, describing that constant dread, that constant fear. Every time the doorbell goes, every time there's someone at the door, you just think it might be the knock, it might be the time. And he's I haven't got the word, Nina, to describe what he's done. I haven't got the word. Insulted, that's pathetic. I insult people every day. Undermined, maligned, polluted, sullied. I haven't got the word to describe what he has done to people like your son and you.
My son, and for every soldier that dies, they're not on their own. There are others that are injured. There's always others that are injured for everyone that dies. And they're still living with that. But they get through it because they know that everybody's proud of them and for what they've done. And Donald Trump has shattered that for a lot of people.
Because it's family. I mean, the NATO troops serving alongside each other, that they are comrades in arms, and their commander-in-chief has now insulted. Oh, man.
I know.
God, a lot of love for your poem, Nina.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
It touched an awful lot of people. So there are quite a few people, like Archie, pointing out that we should try and find a way of getting it in front of Donald Trump. But between you and me, Nina, I don't think he's got the emotional capacity to respond in any meaningful way to what you just read. I don't think it would touch the sides.
No, I don't think he'd understand what half the words meant, would he?
They weren't that long, were they?
More than 3 letters, I think.
Yes, this is true. Hey, you take care. Thanks for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. It is 11:43. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I guess rules are made to be broken, aren't they? We're expecting to hear from Downing Street imminently, possibly before the end of this programme. But I mean, these are the moments where politicians don't have the vocabulary properly to respond to what on earth has gone on. At least I can't even begin to imagine how people who have been defending, championing, cheering for this character are going to be processing the reality of who he is now that they presumably, and this is me being naive once again, presumably they won't be able to cling to the carcass of of his character for any longer, but they've managed in the past, so why wouldn't they be able to manage again? It's coming up to 11:44. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, it's hard to imagine talking about anything else, but I do want to catch up with the situation on the ground in Minneapolis. Emily Maitlis, our friend and colleague, is just back from there, just back from Minnesota, and she'll be able to give us a quick heads up, well, not even a quick heads up, a proper heads up on what is actually unfolding now on the streets of the United States of America, because you can't separate the two. If Donald Trump is prepared to treat the memories of dead British soldiers, Danish, French, German, but this is a British radio station, so we'll focus on the British soldiers for now. If he is prepared to treat their memories like that, how on earth is he prepared to treat people in his own country who are still living? And I think you're going to be quite shocked by some of the answers to that question that Emily will provide after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:47. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention next to events in the United States of America as opposed to events or comments from the President of the United States of America. Emily Maitlis, who she doesn't really need any introduction, but she's written for the New World newspaper, which, along with Private Eye, are the only two publications that I pay actual money to subscribe to, and they drop through my letterbox, and with increasing importance, because they both chronicle the madness that some people are either looking away from or failing to properly record. And Emily is back from the United States of America, where she has been looking at the reality on the ground. And one of the things I enjoyed about your article, Emily, if I may refer to it, was the reminder to those of us of a certain disposition not to fall into the liberal trap. Barack Obama oversaw more deportations than any other US president. As you remind us, the figure is north of 3 million. So with that in the background, what did you discover on this trip?
We've been covering the story pretty comprehensively since Trump came back into power last January. But it's much harder, I think, to get a sense from here of what is really happening on the ground. So we decided that the newsagents team just wanted to be out. We didn't know what we were going to find. We didn't know, frankly, that we would find anything. But it felt important to just be on the ground, talking to people inside communities. And as you say, US president after US president has made deportation quite a sort of main plank of their campaigns. Barack Obama is one of the highest, his administration deported the highest number of illegal immigrants when he was in power, as you say, north of 3 million. But what we found, and it takes you right back to Trump's Republican convention in 2024 when he became nominated, he started putting on all the chairs these signs that said mass deportation now, and people were literally picking them up and waving them. And I think that was a turning point, because this was no longer about criminals, which he'd started by saying, you know, we need to deport the rapists and the criminals and the killers and the murderers. And it was no longer even about people who had tried to scam the system or come in through the back door or hadn't been invited in or had been in illegally. It was people who were in the system. It was people who were living in America for decades, who had been part of communities, who had actually gone through the system to apply for citizenship and were working in most cases, in the vast majority of cases, legally. And this is what we found is actually happening now on the streets. Minneapolis has been targeted because it's a very blue state, because Trump is sort of latching on to its past, not least its connections with the George Floyd murder, and also with a very tangible fraud scandal that has been going on, that is going through the courts in Minneapolis. And so he has essentially zoned in, made this the sort of centre of his crosshairs. And what we found there were communities who are having the hearts ripped out of them, quite frankly. There are kids coming home from schools who find one or other parent has disappeared. There are people wandering around parking lots, elderly people finding their son's car and not knowing where their son is. There are people who are appearing in shackles, about to board deportation flights, dark flights, still wearing an Amazon Union of their morning's work or a construction high-vis vest of their morning's work. In other words, what I'm trying to explain here is there is no due process going on. It is not about the deportation per se. It is about the fact that these are people who in many, many cases were legitimately, legally in the United States and who have been removed in shackles on these dark flights with no due process. There is no way that somebody would still be in their uniform in the morning if they'd actually gone through a process with a lawyer, with an exchange of letters, with somebody to take them through the legal process. The fact it is happening so quickly is what tells us that this administration, quite frankly, is not comfortable with doing things above board. And just to try and put this in context, because I can imagine your listeners and they'll be pushing back and they'll be saying, well, come on, you know, if these people shouldn't be in the country, we should get them out. They should be got out. Isn't that what should be happening? And if they stood on a campaign to remove people from America and that's what people want, then what's so wrong? And I'll tell you what's wrong. We were with a guy who describes himself as a plane spotter. I mean, that is where he approaches this story from. He's passionate about planes. He goes to Minneapolis St. Paul's Airport the whole time. And he knows that every Wednesday in the past, there used to be a deportation flight. And he would monitor it and he would see that and he would look at it along with other flights. And then one day, last year, the deportation flights on a Wednesday stopped. They dried up and they were removed from the schedule around about April or May of last year. And that was when he got interested, because he said, if the deportation flights are now being removed from the schedule, if there is less transparency, what is happening? And so he and his group of sort of plane spotters, a crowdsource, they call themselves MN5051, the sort of, they essentially monitor from the skies all the planes coming in and landing through US airspace to try and get a sense of the picture. And he has built up this picture, and he and his cohort are monitoring every single plane that leaves Minneapolis-St. Paul, any plane that leaves Minnesota, essentially the state, because they are being taken to detention centres in El Paso, detention centres in Nebraska. And because there are people watching the El Paso plane leave, and because there is Nick Benson watching the El Paso plane come in exactly 2 hours and 20 minutes later, and these planes do not exist on any aviation schedule. There is nothing written down. There is no place that you can go and say, oh, can I just check what time the deportation flight's coming in? Oh, can I just check that? What's on that? Why is there no transparency and more regularity? And so for him, and I think for us, that was the question. If you are writing things down, if they are part of your schedules, if you know there is a weekly plane and you know that the due process has been gone through and illegal people, criminal people have been deported, then you have to put that in the context of, well, this is what administrations do and this is what American people voted for. When those planes disappear from the schedule and when the number ramps up, and Nick has now counted 27 flights in January of this year alone. That is more than 2,000 people have been deported since January of this year alone from one airport in one state in the United States.
And just to stress some of the points you've made, thanks to Nick, he's spoken also of airport employees being picked up, which means people who have been vetted and are fit and suitable to work in some very high security scenarios are just being scooped up while at work or on their way home from work or on the school run or going about their legal business, scooped up and stuck on these planes and removed from the country with, as you say, no record, no transparency, no accountability. There's two questions, isn't there? There's always two questions. How aware is the average American of what is going on, and how comfortable is the aware American with what is going on?
I think if you had been living in New York or California, or actually many of the southern states where none of this was particularly visible, you would have been sort of fine with it until now. You would have assumed that he was carrying out an election pledge to remove killers, rapists, murderers, drug addicts from the streets of America, and you would have said, well, that's what the American people voted for. That is no longer what is happening. He is decimating communities. He is targeting immigrant communities. And as I say, there is no legal redress. And the point you just made is very important. If you have a job in an airport, if you are working on the TSA side, on the high security side, you have gone through the system. You have shown your papers. You have proved that you are allowed to work in places of high security. The fact that even airport employees are finding themselves now on the other side, shackled in manacles. There are manacles on these people as they are led up the stairs to deportation flights. The fact that even these people are disappearing. The fact that you will go to, for example, the Mercado Central, the sort of central Latino market neighborhood, and find that of the 42 businesses that used to be up and operating and alive and swinging, 35 of them no longer dare open their doors because people don't want to come to work in case they are pulled from their places of work, and people don't want to shop there because they don't want to be targeted as part of the Latino community. So we are seeing something now which is so arbitrary. I mean, I say arbitrary, but clearly it's it's not arbitrary in the way that it is targeting certain groups of immigrant communities, but it is so mindlessly cruel, actually, what is going on. There is no reason you would have to take somebody's son without telling their parents. There is no reason you'd have to use a 5-year-old child to get in the house to their father. There is no reason. If you believed in the legality and the sense of what you were doing, you wouldn't have to hide this stuff.
And so, I mean, it's in danger of becoming a cliche, but it doesn't mean it's not true. The cruelty is the point now.
The cruelty is the point. The cruelty is the point.
Which brings us, and I appreciate this isn't what you've been addressing on this trip, because it hadn't happened, but the comments Donald Trump has made yesterday about NATO and about... I mean, is there any pattern, Emily? You spend even longer looking at this stuff than I do. Is there any method in this madness? Do we see these two events, the hideous business unfolding across America, but particularly in Minneapolis, and the hideous comments that Donald Trump made yesterday? Are they part of the same piece, or are we just chronicling outbursts of aberration and outrage?
Well, I want to start by saying I was really moved by Nina's call and her poem to her son.
Yeah.
And I think it's quite easy for us as commentators to, get hyperbolic about how crazy and how demented and how cruel, the man in the centre of this is. But actually, Nina's, such a sort of clear example of what happens when it touches people's lives. And I think that's what I would say links the two stories, that most of the time, you listen to the rambling Davos speech and you just think, this is a rambling Davos speech. It's kind of, there is no beginning and there's no end and there's no real sense. And I think we as journalists have to be really careful that we don't jump up and down and say, oh, the world is changing. Oh, this is it. Oh, this is terrible. I don't think it's actually what he says. I think it's the ramifications of what he says on the actions that other people take. So, for example, it's now the actions that the ICE agents are taking in Minneapolis, in his honour, in the same way that people 2 years ago wore those ear bandages when he'd missed an assassination attempt and his ear was bandaged. There is this sort of weird sense of fealty, and to prove your love to the president, you have to carry out more of what he says. And you have the mothers, the parents at the end of those comments who are just left picking up the pieces. And I think it's kind of a lesson for us, which is, we are so desperate to preserve this American alliance and so desperate to believe in the special relationship. God, how long have we been banging on about the special relationship for? But really, what's at the bottom of it? Because if he's going to mangle history, if you're going to send out your troops, if you are going to come to the support, and obviously he doesn't speak for most Americans. He doesn't speak, I don't think, for the vast majority who understand exactly what part British and NATO soldiers and troops played in Afghanistan and Iraq and in other conflicts that we've been through together. But if he mangles history to such a point where he just kind of makes you wish he hadn't even bothered, then isn't it going to make everyone think about where the relationship is now, what we do now?
And that's a question that Keir Starmer will hopefully be addressing sooner rather than later. Emily, thank you. Emily Maitlis of the News Agents, recently returned, as you heard, from Minneapolis. You can hear that episode, that investigation, and indeed those interviews on the LBC app or the Global Player. But you should really be listening to the News Agents every day anyway. You are currently listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and the time is 12:02.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 6 minutes after 12. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We won't be looking away from the comments that Donald Trump made yesterday, even as we have that slightly sickening sense of deja vu almost. I can't believe I said to you just 26 hours ago that we have to try not to fall into the trap of talking about the latest disgusting thing he's done, because it dilutes the impact of the last disgusting thing he did. And it doesn't even have to be disgusting, it can be ridiculous. That's the other thing I said to you 26 hours ago, was about the relationship between horror and hilarity. He veers from the hilarious, because he's such an idiot, to the horrific, because he's such a monster. And that's where we are. So on Friday today, right? So on Wednesday, he chickened out of the Greenland threats. He was forced to by European unity and Canadian leadership from Mark Carney. It became clear that he wasn't going to be able to bully his way into the position that he thought, or he sought to bully his way into. Which means that on Thursday we should have been dedicating all of our attention to the absurdity of Donald Trump's Greenland mission. Or no, because it wasn't absurd until it failed. And it only failed because people like Keir Starmer and Mark Carney and Emmanuel Macron and others changed tactics. Their resolve firmed. They girded their loins. But we weren't talking about that on Thursday because he launched his Board of Peace, about which you may never hear another word. You probably will, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility that you will never hear another word about it, because it will fail, or at least its constitution of war criminals and genocide apologists or genocide architects. Its constitution of war criminals and genocide architects will render it unconscionable for decent leaders. Not necessarily, but it hopefully will. And it was essentially announced and undertaken on the stage in Davos only to ensure that people were not dedicating all of their bandwidth, that the media wasn't dedicating all of its news to the failure of his Greenland bid, to the cowardice and the climb down and the mother of all chicken demonstrations that Donald Trump had undertaken the previous day. But we're not talking about the Board of Peace today, because we're talking about his insult to, well, the families of every single caller I've taken so far, and thousands, countless more listening, and everybody who is grateful for their service, everybody who is grateful for their potential sacrifice, everybody who understands the importance of NATO, let alone people who have contributed to its existence and its deployment only once under the requirements of Article 5, which is where every signatory joins forces to fight a common enemy. And the only country that's ever invoked Article 5 is the United States of America. And the commander-in-chief of their armed forces has just insulted everybody else. I mean, this is a moment of such unbelievable madness. But it also highlights that other thing I talked about, which is the difficulty of being sufficiently disgusted, not just through disassociation, but through drowning. Drowning in it now. Drowning in it. But we'll continue, and I want to move the conversation, perhaps, I don't have to, you could continue simply to react to what Donald Trump has said and done, and I may, because I appreciate not everybody listens for the whole 3 hours, I may remind you of what he's said and done shortly. But I'm interested also in the relationship with NATO that you, as a soldier, past or present, have. What does it mean to be a member of a NATO force? I think it was James Blunt, wasn't it, who was talking to me on Full Disclosure about his role in, was it in Afghanistan? I can't remember, but I remember him talking to me about NATO in a way that I hadn't really heard before, because I always think about the British army. But you're not. You're there in Afghanistan, you're there as a member of NATO. What does that mean? What is the sense of fellowship with other NATO countries, other NATO personnel? Just give the rest of us a bit of a lesson, if you can, on what this does to the very concept of NATO itself and the fellow feeling that you have between European and American and Canadian troops. And if you can do that, 0345 60 60973. Blunt was in Bosnia, wasn't he? Blunt was in the former Yugoslavia, not in the Middle East. My bad. Let's go to Jeff, who's in Lille in France. Jeff, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Jeff.
First time, so but I couldn't speak to you straight away because it really upset me what I heard. I was driving. I was going to work. I actually got into work, and I got my phone connected to LBC, and I heard it, and I just cracked. I had to walk out of work, and they sort of chased me down, saying, "What's my?" And I couldn't speak to them. I couldn't speak to them. just really, really upset me. And just before I actually tell you what I feel, or my thing, Nina, was it Nina who sent that poem?
Yes.
I am glad I didn't come on straight away after her, because I cracked.
Why do you think I went to the news quicker than ever, Jeff?
I cracked.
Yeah,
I really cracked. It was beautiful. One of the beautiful poems I ever heard. Really, I've heard a couple others, but that really hit a nerve as well. So
it was so real, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's really real. Anyway, my thing. There is a book called Attack State Red. I think it was written by a guy called Colonel Richard Kemp.
Yeah.
And I think it's Chris Hughes or Chris Hayes. I can't remember exactly. Now, in that book, it's about the tour of duty they did because I'm in France, I'm saying French now. And a group of... That's why I listen to your radio, because I think English. I'm listening to English for a while.
There it is.
Anyway, there's this. They're talking about the tour of duty in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Now, on page, I think it's page 7, or is it page 10 or 11, or I can't remember exactly.
Sure.
And another 3 or 4 pages afterwards. My son's in it.
Okay.
He was speaking about my son, and I can't read all the book. I can't read all of it. I've read parts of it, but as soon as I get into it, it brings me back to my son, and I get a panic attack, and I have to put the book down. I can't read it anymore. Because he did a tour of duty in Afghanistan.
Right.
And he was 17, 18 when he went. When he came back, he was a totally different person.
Yeah.
In his group, there was a guy called Private Chris Gray, who was the first Royal Anglian who died. He was in infantry. He was the first one who died in Afghanistan. So when he came back, he was talking about him. He was talking about a lot of things. And when I heard what Trump had said, I'm not even going to call him president. I just say Trump. He doesn't deserve being called president.
True.
I've been listening to lots of other stuff that was happening, and I just think, yeah, the man, you know what he's like. That's him, and he's going to get away with it because nobody will pull him up on it. The press seems to just think, they're almost like scared of him. They just won't say nothing about it.
Yeah.
But this, for me, was a bridge too far for me. Was way, 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 way too far for me. How a man who dodged his own service draft because of spurs on his feet, as he said. Allegedly, yeah. Because the man. If he was somebody who was like, you could say, okay, maybe, but no, the man. So you can say allegedly. He come out with a comment like that. I mean, how? It's not even disgraceful. It's not even appalling. It's not even. It's beyond that. It's just. When I first heard it, I got into work and I just cracked. I had to go in the dark room or go downstairs where I was, where my office is, and just.
Why did it hit you so hard?
Because of my son. Because what happened was that my son was in the army about 18, 19 years, I think.
Yeah.
And he really loved the army, and he wanted to move. He was in. I'll say this much. He wanted to do. He was a sniper,
right,
in the sniper's corps, and he was going well in that. But he wanted to go further, and I think I know where he wanted to go. But I'm not going to say now.
No. You say no. Don't say anything you're uncomfortable with.
But he lost his way and somehow took his own life.
After his service.
Why he was on duty. And so, sorry, I thought I'd go with this.
Hey, it's all fine. Well, I mean, this moment in your life is fine. All right, I'm here.
Sorry.
And we've got all the space and all the time that you need. Or none at all. Or if you want to go and have a cup of tea, that's fine.
No, I'm
that's
fine.
too. I'm so sorry to hear that.
That's why I couldn't speak to you straight away, because I just couldn't do it. I couldn't. But now I'm getting over it. Well, you never get over it. You never get over it.
Of course you don't.
Anyway, it happened, and then to see his colleagues at his funeral, and because it was in COVID when it happened,
right?
About 4.5 years ago, and I've never seen so many people at a funeral in their uniforms celebrating my son's life. And I said that poem what Nina read, it was like it just brought it all back again, because I heard poems, and it was like, oh. So it all hit home. And so when I hear this man saying we weren't there, it's like, really, really? You have how many sons have you got? You've got 3 sons. I mean, how would you feel if one of your sons was?
I don't think he can do that. I think that's empathy. I think that involves being able to imagine being someone else than yourself, and I don't think he can do it. And to be honest, I don't know. I mean, the love you have for your son is so clear to everybody listening to this, but not all people are capable of feeling love like that, Jeff.
Well, it's not just, I mean, as I said, when my son was telling me about his friend, Chris, was it Chris Gray?
Yeah.
I thought that could have been my son. And so, I said I can't read all the book, because when I read the bits I've read, and then when they're saying that he was lifting his head up the wall, and was letting off a couple of rounds, and the guy said brave lad, and it's like whoa, I know my son, just came too close to home for me. But
of course it did.
But when I hear this, it's just that, I mean, see, I've heard him talk lots of rubbish in his life, Trump. It's just rubbish.
But there's rubbish and there's rubbish, isn't there?
Yeah, but this hit home for me. And I do think, I believe my personal feeling is that after Mick Carney and Macron and Keir Starmer, after all these people stood up to him, he had to back down. And I also believe that his own military personnel, some of them said, "No, we're not going to go that far. That's too far," because NATO is they are part of NATO.
Yes, of course.
It's not just Great Britain.
I mean, it would have been NATO. It would have been one NATO member taking up arms against another NATO member. That's what he was talking about.
Yeah, and I don't think the US military would have gone that far. I really don't think they would have gone that far. And so I think basically it was like, two fingers salute at the rest of us at Europe, the European, because obviously the man who can't deal with problems like that. So I think
he's lashing out, isn't he, Jeff?
He's lashing out. Yeah. It's a lash out. You guys didn't do nothing. It's like, seriously? Was you there? What do you know about it? You don't know nothing about it. It's just, and God, I really would like to get him in a dark room.
I think there'd be a queue. I think there'd be quite a long queue at the moment. I really do. I
would be fighting to get to that front. I can't.
I don't want to. I don't want to go yet. I don't want you to go yet. I want to hear you feeling a bit better before we say goodbye. Do you know what I mean?
No, I've had 4 years of trying to deal with it, and I have his picture on my cabinet before I go out the front door, and every day I look at it, I touch it, I say goodbye, and every now and again I have my moment, and I will say, okay, right, I'm ready, let's go. But there's not a day that doesn't go I don't think about him.
Of course there isn't. You honour his memory, Jeff. You really do.
Yeah, it's just. But I try to honour all of them. It's not just him. Yeah. He wasn't in. Actually, it didn't happen in Afghanistan at the time. But all the others as well. You just. My heart goes out to every single one, every single parent, because I am one of them. I wasn't in.
Of course you are. Of course you are.
He came back a different person. I knew he was. We talked and we laughed and joked. And 2 days, I spoke to him the Sunday on a phone call, and he sent me some photos of a family party that he was at, and I said, okay, thanks for that, Matt, and moved on from there. And next thing I know, on the Tuesday, I got a phone call from that my son is dead, and that was. I thought I'd brace myself for if he was doing tour of duty and it happened. Yeah, okay. Of course, I said, okay, well, but that was just like out of the blue, and it was just, and at work as well. It's like, just hard.
There's no justice, mate.
Hard. It was very, very hard.
Of course it was. But as I say, I wish I had more powerful words or more helpful words for you. But you do honour his memory, and everybody listening to this knows what you know. And and everybody shares your utter revulsion at what this so-called man has said about all of his comrades, and past and present, living and no longer with us, Jeff.
Yeah, he's just my own 2 pence worth. I know this is slightly going off the beaten track.
I think that's allowed in the circumstances, Jeff.
I think part of the problem with him is, especially with this Epstein file, I do not think it's all about the atrocity what Epstein did. I mean, we all know what he did. I'm not even going to go to that part of it. But I don't think it's all about that with Trump. I think it's the dirty money. I really do think it's the dirty money. I just think him and Putin has got something. He was doing something because a lot of the Russian oligarchs, they muddle their money, and I'm sure Trump has got something to do with that.
Well, his son boasted not long ago about how they could raise all the money they needed in Russia after they became persona non grata with US banks, but it's going to be a while before we find that out. Are you all right?
Find out tomorrow, but
no, we're not.
We're going to find out about it, and I think we are. Think that's part of it. That's part of it.
I would not be surprised. A lot of love for you personally coming in, Jeff, from my listeners. An awful lot of love.
Oh, thank you very much.
Oh, well, you know, they mean it. You touched a lot of people, and myself included, actually. I'm so sorry for your loss.
You just carry on.
Of course you do.
You just carry on.
You just carry on. Are you all right?
Yeah, I'm all right.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks, James.
Well,
Thanks a lot.
Okay,
Thanks again.
Stay safe. Take care. God bless you. If you're affected by the issue that Jeff just talked about, I should remind you the Samaritans are available 24 hours a day on 116123. It's 12:23.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 25 minutes after 12 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we continue to collect responses to Donald Trump's hideous comments about NATO, and specifically, I think, about British troops, and even, of course, about British casualties and bereaved British families who've learned overnight that the current Commander-in-Chief of the United States Forces doesn't really think that they did anything in Afghanistan. They stayed away from the front line. Natasha Clark is with me, LBC's political editor, because the government, the Prime Minister's office, has, as you would expect, responded to this moment in fairly robust terms.
Yeah, that's right, James. And obviously, we have seen over the course of the morning ministers coming out to make comments of basically condemning President Trump's remarks. We've heard from Yvette Cooper, the Foreign Secretary, this morning. And in the last few minutes, we've just been hearing from Downing Street. They say that Donald Trump was wrong to claim that NATO forces stayed away from the front line in Afghanistan. The PM's official spokesperson has said the president was wrong to diminish the role of NATO troops, including British forces, in Afghanistan following the 9/11 attacks on the US. Article 5 of the NATO treaty was evoked for the first time. British forces served alongside American and other allied troops in sustained combat operations. And of course, they make the point that 457 British service personnel lost their lives in Afghanistan, and many more were wounded. Many hundreds suffered the life-changing injuries from their service alongside the US and our allies in Afghanistan. So I don't think you really could have it any stronger than Downing Street telling Donald Trump, telling the White House they are wrong. This is just misinformed, it is ill-informed, it is untrue. It reminds me of when we spoke before about the remarks that J.D. Vance spoke about troops. So clearly there is something incredibly ill-informed about the heart of White House thinking about what they believe that other NATO allies and other troops did to help them out in wars gone by. And Number 10 say the sacrifice and that of other NATO forces was made in the service of collective security and in response to an attack on our ally. We are incredibly proud of our armed forces. Their service and sacrifice will never be forgotten. So really coming out swinging. We've also been hearing this morning from our own Armed Forces Minister Al Carnes.
On Afghanistan, frankly, this is utterly ridiculous. Many courageous and honourable service personnel from many nations fought on the front line. Many fought way beyond it. I'd served 5 tours in Afghanistan, many alongside my American colleagues. We shed blood, sweat and tears together, and not everybody came home. These are bonds, I think, forged in fire, protecting US or shared interests, but actually protecting democracy overall. And I'd suggest whoever believes these comments, come have a whiskey with me, my colleagues, their families, and importantly, the families of those that have made the ultimate sacrifice for both of our nations. It's also worth reminding everyone here in World War II, more British troops landed on D-Day than any other nation. It was an allied response, and united we conquer. Now, some advice for anyone who may be listening. There are two great sayings worth remembering. Number one, there's only one worse thing than working with allies. That is working without them.
He posted that message saying the UK served on the front line in Afghanistan and often way beyond it. Very powerful words.
Very strong. I mean, the problem with Trump, of course, the problem that we have is it's everything he does, however vile, is here today, gone tomorrow. Would we expect the Prime Minister to raise this next time he speaks to the President? And might we expect the Prime Minister to go further than an official statement from Downing Street? Speaking, I mean, it's his words. Or on his behalf, but would we expect some sort of address or some sort of... there's no precedent, is there, for moments like this?
No.
Because it's our greatest ally committing the greatest insult.
Yeah, and you wouldn't have expected this statement to come. And actually, I feel like this week, Downing Street has turned a bit of a corner in their relationship with Trump. You know, the idea after those Chagos comments of what Keir Starmer said at Prime Minister's Questions, as we were discussing a couple of days ago, and the messages coming out of Number 10 earlier this week, where the President is wrong on this, and calling the President wrong, that is a step that I think Downing Street...
Especially for a man-child like that who responds so petulantly to any pushback and criticism.
Yeah, and so far, during Donald Trump's presidency, Downing Street have been very reluctant to say those three words, he is wrong, and they have done that today in this week for the first time. I don't imagine the Prime Minister will come out and make a statement. He probably won't want to make a big statement. I think he's probably got his ministers to really do the heavy lifting here for him, and he's got his spokesperson to say what he thinks.
Al-Khan's, as you say, they're going absolutely all in and very, very, very powerfully. I mean, the defence would be that when you are in power, you have to be mindful of the future and of alliances, but a politician in opposition, Ed Davey, for example, would be free to absolutely go in with, pardon the metaphor, with all guns blazing at a moment like this, and I expect he probably will, if not next Wednesday in PMQs, then sooner.
Yeah, I imagine opposition parties, as you would hope at least, would get behind sort of bringing in this sort of moment where you'd expect your opposition leaders to really band together. But yes, Davey will probably go further and will really, really criticise Donald Trump. The one man we haven't heard from today, Nigel Farage, he's not said anything about this, which you would expect this to be something.
I thought we had it with... No, we've got a clip of him.
Have you?
Yeah.
Okay, let's hear it.
Here's Matt Hewitt with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 25 minutes to 1, and it is Simon Mark's time, actually. I'm a bit discombobulated, just like you are. I bet you, I mean, crikey. Do you want to swap for the next 25 minutes? Some of the calls that I've taken today have broken me. I'm not going to lie to you. I know that you've been very emotionally affected by them as well, but good God, when you are reminded of the reason why we're having these conversations, I don't know quite what the words would be to describe how many of us are feeling today as a consequence of Donald Trump's latest aberration. And once again, I find my own vocabulary, which John in Switzerland was so kind about earlier, is just not up to the task of articulating some of the feelings that you and I are sharing today. Simon, welcome. We should probably begin with these comments. Do they make big news in the United States, these heinous and egregious insults against people who gave up their lives in service to a mission that was called by the Commander-in-Chief of the United States?
Well, they're certainly not making news in the United States, James, to the extent that they are obviously making news on your side of the Atlantic and also in Canada as well. Because remember, this is the week in which Mark Carney officially consigned the transatlantic alliance to the ash heap of history based on Donald Trump's actions. I would make the point that this is not an aberration by President Donald Trump. to put these remarks into context, to put the trashing of the reputation of British service personnel who were slain in Afghanistan alongside 159 Canadians, 44 Danes, the highest per capita fatality rate in Afghanistan was suffered by Denmark. To put all of this into its broader context, we are at the end of a week in which Donald Trump and his top lieutenants removed the last vestiges of their mask. They are not hiding their loathing of Europe, everything that it stands for, its leaders, its economic position, and they are absolutely determined that not only is Europe now risking, as Donald Trump put it in his speech in Davos, death, or as the national security strategy here calls it, civilizational erasure. They insist that the only thing that is going to save Europe is when the voters of Europe realize that their salvation lies in the hands of what the Trump administration refers to as patriotic European parties. The Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been giving voice to this again in an interview that has just been posted by the website Politico, essentially saying Europeans need to look at the tremendous success that Donald Trump is having, rebuilding America, closing its borders, ending mass migration, and they need to understand that the future for them lies in embracing similar policies. So this is not a coincidental swipe at the sacrifice that was made by over 450 British families in Afghanistan. This goes to the absolute heart of US government official policy now towards Europe, which is constantly to undermine the Keir Starmers, the Emmanuel Macrons, the Friedrich Merzes, all of them, and to boost the Nigel Farages, the Marine Le Pens, the Jordan Bardellas, the AfD leadership in Germany. That is what is driving this policy, and that is why it is so important to dwell at the end of this week on what Canada has done and on what Volodymyr Zelensky did last night in Davos. Both Mark Carney and Volodymyr Zelensky saying this week, the party is over. There can no longer be any pretense of an ability to work with this president and this America. And when you ask about what people are seeing on American television, Fox News last night, and Donald Trump has reposted this and pinned it to the top of his Truth social media account, presented a 7.5 minute, I won't even call it a report, I mean homage to President Trump in Davos that completely misrepresents what took place there and tells the audience that Donald Trump is returning to the United States as a conquering hero who has wiped the leaders' noses of Europe in Davos and has shown them what effective parenting is all about. So that's the reality that's going into millions of American homes, the largest, most successful news channel in the United States, basically portraying Donald Trump as a conquering hero as he flew back from Davos last night, while we all think, you know, he climbed down, he completely caved on the issue of Greenland and committed this absolute shameless slander against the servicemen and women of the UK and other European and indeed Canadian armed forces.
I thought I was incapable of being surprised by the events of the last 24 hours. I thought I was across them. But so you're basically talking about propaganda, entirely false propaganda being punted by Rupert Murdoch's television station in the United States of America that completely contradicts the evidence of our own eyes and ears.
Yes, I mean, everything about it. I'm actually going to run a whole chunk of this tonight on American Week during Tom Swarbrick's programme. But everything about the presentation of this is alternative facts. And it's not just what's going on Fox, James. It's what is tumbling from the president's mouth. Yes. It has been hard this week to identify a single truth that actually emerged from the president's mouth. I mean, back in the first term, alternative facts were kind of vying with real facts in the president's vocabulary, and it was always very uncomfortable. The real facts have absolutely evaporated now from Donald Trump's speeches. We saw that rambling appearance on the first anniversary of his return to the Oval Office at the White House. We then saw the speech in Davos. Both of those appearances absolutely littered with falsehoods, including even the claim that Greenland is part of North America. It's our territory, a completely false telling of the history of Greenland during the Second World War, in which Donald Trump appears to have convinced himself that President Trump, that the United States owned Greenland.
Yeah, I heard that.
By the time the Second World War was over, and then made a mistake and granted it back to Denmark, and he's simply trying to correct that historical mistake. But the lies go way beyond that. In the Davos speech, he talked about how the Chinese were terrific at making windmills, building windmills, and selling them to European nations, but you don't find any windmill farms in China itself. In fact, China produces 3 times more energy through wind and windmill farms than the United States of America. On Air Force One last night, he was talking about Americans' 401k retirement funds. And he was claiming that during the last year, they had risen between 80 and 90%, and actually claimed that in some cases, they had risen by 100%. The actual number, the average increase in an American's 401k retirement fund since Donald Trump returned to the White House, 9.6%. So there are no facts. There are simply no facts that are being presented by him, that are being presented by his White House, by men like Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, who did not even try to conceal their disdain and hostility towards Mark Carney, towards European governments in Davos this week. And there are certainly no facts emanating from the plethora of propaganda outlets now in the United States that tell Americans that Donald Trump is the greatest president this country has ever known.
I mean, it is, again, I worry about Groundhog Day for people listening, but it is almost impossible to grasp the scale of what has already happened and what is underway. But I suppose we should reflect upon the fact that it didn't have to be like this. Jack Smith, former special counsel to the Justice Department and investigating Donald Trump's attempts to steal the 2020 election, was giving evidence yesterday in Congress. The Democratic Representative Zoe Lofgren asked him about some of the stuff that was motivating that investigation, and this was his response.
In terms of the grand jury testimony that's now been released, the fact that Donald Trump, according to Senator Graham, would believe that Martians stole the election, what does that tell you about Trump's state of mind?
That statement is consistent with what we found in our investigation, in that our investigation revealed that Donald Trump was not looking for honest answers about whether there was fraud in the election. He was looking for ways to stay in power. And when people told him things that conflicted with him staying in power, he rejected them, or he chose not even to contact people like that who would know if the election was done properly in the state. On the other hand, when individuals would say things that would allow him to stay in power, no matter how fantastical, he would latch on to those. That pattern, over time, we felt was powerful evidence that he, in fact, knew that the fraud claims he was making were false.
It feels like a dispatch from a different universe now.
I was just going to say, it feels like an archaeological relic.
Yeah.
I mean, and not just Mr. Smith, but the entire process, the entire proceeding. And I mean, Jack Smith is, I think personally, he said yesterday in testimony that he believes that he is personally at risk of being indicted by the Department of Justice because President Trump has told the Attorney General Pam Bondi to go after him. I mean, I think that Jack Smith is a complicated figure for many Americans because it is hard to argue that the Merrick Garland-run Department of Justice under President Joe Biden was entirely pure as the driven snow. Clearly, it was nothing compared to the mire that Donald Trump has created at the Department of Justice by piercing and terminating its traditional but not constitutionally guaranteed independence. But listening to that and watching it yesterday, it's what we all know. Donald Trump absolutely... Yeah.
And I like that point about Merrick Garland because even with partisanship and politicking, there was once, not long ago, ground upon which all people could agree. There were behaviours or transgressions that would bring united condemnation. And it's hard to forget, I beg your pardon, it's easy to forget that January the 6th did that. I mean, people who are now bending the knee for Donald Trump responded very strongly to that event. He became briefly persona non grata, but the other thing that Smith reminded us of was the impact of the pardons that Trump began to enact before he'd even got his backside through the door of the White House for the second time.
The people who assaulted police officers and who were convicted after trial, in my view, and I think in the view of the judges who sentenced them to prison, are dangers to their community. As you've mentioned, some of these people have already committed crimes against their communities again, and I think all of us, if we're reasonable, know that there's going to be more crimes committed by these people in the future. I do not understand why you would mass pardon people who assaulted police officers. I don't get it. I never will.
The spell's not going to break, is it?
No, absolutely not. I mean, we're on an inevitable trajectory here, and while it does sound like Groundhog Day, it's also changing.
It's getting worse and worse.
It's advancing,
yeah, of course.
And we're moving further and further away from any possibility of reverting to the America that we all grew up knowing. I mean, even in the space of a week, James, remember, I think it was back on Monday, we were talking about the Prime Minister saying that he wanted to have a calm discussion with President Trump, that we need to find a solution over Greenland that is rooted in partnership, facts, mutual respect, and alliances. I mean, all of that's gone out of the window in 96 hours. So we're just moving down an absolutely devastating dark tunnel with not a chink of light at the end of it. Again on Air Force One last night, he started musing right at the end of his exchange with reporters about the midterm elections in November. He said a couple of times, he didn't say this last night, but he's already said a couple of times, I don't even know why we have to have elections in November. Then the White House says that's facetious. He's joking. Last night was the beginning of a new narrative. He started saying, presidents always lose midterm elections. Only twice in 50 years, he claims, has a president ever won a midterm election, which, of course, is a misunderstanding anyway, because presidents aren't running in midterm elections. They are really a referendum on a president's performance, but that's the only link to the president. But there's something percolating away in the back of his mind about these midterm elections. He said last night, you'd have to get a psychiatrist to come and explain why, people turn against a governing party in midterm elections. We've got to watch that space because there's something going on.
And we will rely upon you to keep that watching brief for us. Simon Marks joining Tom Swarbrick later today with even more detail on what has been going on during this, I said it at the top of the show, didn't it? If you didn't understand why it's a Chinese curse to wish upon people that they lived in interesting times, well, you know now.
James O'Brien on LBC.
9:53 is the time. Full disclosure is back this week, and it's a fascinating interview with a chap called Rutger Bregman, who you might think you don't know, but you do. He's the chap who was at Davos a few years ago railing against all the billionaires arriving in private jets but failing to talk at all about tax avoidance. And more recently, of course, he gave the Wreath Lecture, which the BBC, in their wisdom, elected to censor. His new book, Moral Ambition, is something of a masterpiece. It also probably gets filed under self-help books. Here is a little taste of our conversation.
Most people are pretty decent, but power corrupts. And that's basically also my read of history. So if we go back all the way to the age of the nomadic hunter-gatherers, there's so much evidence now, both from anthropology and from archaeology, that warfare is a recent invention, that it didn't exist for most of human history, or barely existed at least, that these societies were way more egalitarian economically, but also between the sexes, and that the great mistake, as Jean-Jacques Rousseau famously argued in what is it, the 18th century, was that someday people settled down and said, this piece of land, that's mine. Yeah. And Rousseau famously wrote, that's the moment when we should all have said, don't believe this idiot, right? That was the agricultural revolution, the Neolithic revolution. And again, there's consensus now that made life much worse for the vast majority of people, up until only a very short time ago, with the Industrial Revolution, obviously, and the extraordinary growth of wealth that slowly started to trickle down since the late 19th century. Also gave us horrific wars, obviously. So the jury is still out on whether the Industrial Revolution was a good thing. But that is basically how I look at the whole shape of human history. Deep down, humans are fundamentally cooperative. They're not saints, not at all. Sure. They definitely have a dark side as well, but on balance, they're cooperative, relatively friendly creatures. This is what evolutionary psychologists call the survival of the friendliest. For millennia, it was the friendliest among us who had the most kids, who had the biggest chance of passing on their genes to the next generation. It's just that power corrupts. Power is an incredibly dangerous drug.
Strangely appropriate given the conversation we've been having for the last 3 hours. And I'm going to end today's programme with a call back to the very first call today, which was from Aidan, and his commemoration of the Victoria Cross. I should be clear, Last Corporal Joshua Leakey is still with us, but he received the Victoria Cross for his actions in Afghanistan. And Aidan suggested we look at the citation, so we will. Here's the whole thing. Between May and December 2013, Lance Corporal Leakey was deployed in Afghanistan as a member of a task force conducting operations to disrupt insurgent safe havens and protect the main operating base in Helmand province. The majority of operations took place in daylight in non-permissive areas, attracting significant risk. On the 22nd of August 2013, Lance Corporal Leakey deployed on a combined UK-US assault led by the United States Marine Corps into a Taliban stronghold to disrupt a key insurgent group. After dismounting from their helicopters, the force came under accurate machine gun and rocket-propelled grenade fire, resulting in the command group being pinned down on the exposed forward slope of a hill. The team attempted to extract from the killing zone for an hour, their efforts resulting in a Marine Corps captain being shot and wounded and their communications being put out of action. Lance Corporal Leakey, positioned on the lee of the hill, realising the seriousness of the situation and with complete disregard for his own safety, dashed across a large area of barren hillside which was now being raked with machine gun fire. As he crested the hill, the full severity of the situation became apparent. Approximately 20 enemy had surrounded 2 friendly machine gun teams and a mortar section, rendering their critical fire support ineffective. Undeterred by the very clear and present danger, Lance Corporal Leakey moved down the forward slope of the hill and gave first aid to the wounded officer. Despite being the most junior commander in the area, Lance Corporal Leakey took control of the situation and initiated the casualty evacuation. Realising that the initiative was still in the hands of the enemy, he set off back up the hill, still under enemy fire, to get one of the suppressed machine guns into action. On reaching it, and with rounds impacting on the frame of the gun itself, he moved it to another position and began engaging the enemy. This courageous action spurred those around him back into the fight. Nonetheless, the weight of enemy fire continued. For the third time, and with full knowledge of the extant dangers, Lance Corporal Leakey exposed himself to enemy fire once more. Weighed down by over 60 pounds of equipment, he ran to the bottom of the hill, picked up the second machine gun and climbed back up the hill again, a round trip of more than 200 metres on steep terrain. Drawing the majority of the enemy fire, with rounds splashing around him, Lance Corporal Leakey overcame his fatigue to re-sight the gun and return fire. This proved to be the turning point. Inspired by Lance Corporal Leakey's actions and with a heavy weight of fire now at their disposal, the force began to fight back with renewed ferocity. Having regained the initiative, Lance Corporal Leakey handed over the machine gun and led the extraction of the wounded officer to a point from which he could be safely evacuated. During this assault, 11 insurgents were killed and 4 wounded, but the weight of enemy fire had effectively pinned down the command team. Displaying gritty leadership well above that expected of his rank, Lance Corporal Leakey's actions single-handedly regained the initiative and prevented considerable loss of life, allowing a wounded US Marine officer to be evacuated. For this act of valour, Lance Corporal Leakey is highly deserving of significant national recognition, namely the Victoria Cross, for actions which President Trump prefers to describe as hanging back from the front line. That's it from me for today. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app, where you can stay up to date on the top stories and opinions, put your news categories in the order you want, pause and rewind live radio, and listen to a range of podcasts, including Full Disclosure and the James O'Brien Daily, the best bits from this show every day. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, remember, with a side order of Simon Marks. But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.